Okay, so well, thanks everybody. Here we are for meeting the needs of underserved audiences. It's a listening session, and I work in Vermont. And I want to start the session by expressing my sincere and very deep gratitude to each of our panelists who agreed to take the time today to participate on somewhat short notice. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to let each of them tell you more about themselves, but we have a great group and lots of different perspectives. And now I need to just, okay, that will work. So I wanted to give you a little overview of what we're going to be doing today. Our goals for the session are that we'll collectively, both our panelists and you participants, begin to explore how the intersection of gender with race, ethnicity, and culture can affect women's experiences and needs when it comes to building businesses, and in particular farm and ranch businesses. We're hoping that it might inspire you to start to think about how to make changes to the way you do your work so that you're doing a better job meeting the needs of underserved audiences, and to perhaps think about ways to help build equity in food and farming systems, including the whole technical assistance and education system for farmers and ranchers. And finally, that you'll leave with at least one idea for a resource or a program model that you can look to help you get going with your next steps. The format is going to be a panel discussion. For most of it, we're not going to have slides, and we're going to move fairly quickly. I had a lot of questions I was hoping each of our panelists could address, so we're going to ask them to be fairly succinct in their answers. I'm sure that we can do follow-up later, either through email. There will be a Q&A time at the end, but we can also follow up with email if we don't get to everything, all the questions you have. At the end, I'm going to come back in with some slides to show you some resources that I've explored and that our panelists recommended, and then we'll have time for Q&A. And please, if your questions come up as we're going along, please go ahead and enter them in the chat box. And then Mary or Lisa Scarborough may read them to us later, but we'll probably address most of them at the end. So at this point, I want to just go to our I think there's a way that we can have bigger pictures of people, although I'm not sure. Are you guys hearing me, seeing me? Yeah, okay. Okay, here we are. So I'm hoping, so we'll start with some introductions. So for each panelist, if you could tell us a little about you and your work. If you could tell us your name, your organization or business, and its mission activities, the audiences you work with, and also a little bit about your interest and involvement in building equity in food and farming systems. And I'll just sort of call on each person. So if it's okay, Lindsay, we'll start with you.
Sure. Definitely. My name is Lindsay Lunsford. I work at Tuskegee University through Tuskegee University Cooperative Extension Program. And a little bit about our mission and our activities. So Tuskegee Cooperative Extension began in 1906 with the appointment of Thomas Monroe Campbell as the first extension agent in the United States. A lot of people aren't familiar with who the first extension agent was, or that he was an African-American man from Alabama. So I definitely always love to put that out there. And also, since 1906 and other legendary figures like Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver's original models for research and integrated extension, we've been carrying this forward into the 21st century, serving our clientele. And our clientele, we focus mainly on people in the Black Belt region of the United States, especially the Black Belt of the South. And if you're not familiar with the Black Belt, I would definitely look into that with the different unique and intricate stories that we have here. And a little bit about my work. I'm a sustainable food systems resource specialist here at Tuskegee. So I focus on food systems, and I work out of the Carver Integrative Sustainability Center, where we focus specifically, or one of our prime focuses is racial equity in the food system and the intersections between racial equity in the food system. So I lead a team here called the Tuskegee Public Dialogue Team, and we focus on using public dialogue as a method to assess and to understand the levels of racial equity within our food system. So that's just a little bit about me.
Great, thank you. Shitomi?
Hi, my name is Shitomi Lesser Edward, and I currently work for the University of Missouri Extension as the Urban County Program Director / County Engagement Specialist. I've been with Extension for about, I'd say about 8 years. During my time here, I have been the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Fellow for E-Extension. I also participate with Michigan State in their food system initiative on racial equity, in addition to being a part of Prosperity Now, which is a national organization that focuses on the underserved and poverty. And it, also, Lindsay and I became really close in participating in the public dialogue, along with many others. So some of my work that I focus on is really specific to the underserved, low to moderate income. In my previous life, I also had a small business. So some of you all might be a little bit more interested in not only the work that I currently do here with Extension, but also some of the work that I've done in the past and the experiences I have had in the past as being a small business owner, as a woman, and as a person of color. So I'll stop there, and then we can just kind of go.
Thank you, Shitomi. Jen? Is it Jen or Jennifer?
Either one. Okay. I'm Jennifer Silveri. I'm Director of Field Operations with Michigan Food and Farming Systems. Michigan Food and Farming Systems is a statewide nonprofit in Michigan that connects beginning and underserved farmers to resources and to each other to support environmental stewardship, profitability, and social justice. We do a lot of different things through our peer-to-peer farmer networks, one of which is a Women in Ag network. We also have a Women in Ag Farm Development Center that's an incubator farm attached to Genesis Hospital just outside of Flint, Michigan. We do a lot of work to connect beginning and historically underserved farmers to resources at USDA through the Farm Bill, and to make training that comes from the myriad of partners we have in the state, whether that's conservation districts, USDA, MSU Extension, or Department of Agriculture, more accessible to farmers. I cut my teeth growing up in conservation districts, USDA world, and would go to a lot of food systems work group meetings and social justice meetings around food systems, and always felt like I was the person constantly pointing out resources that were available through Farm Bill programs that producers in underserved communities never had any access or exposure to. So we developed a lot of programming and guides to be able to help producers access that information that they traditionally have been separated from, and then developed a lot of strategies in the state to bring farmers together so that they can learn from each other in a safe, local, culturally appropriate environment, and pair farmers with educators to improve the receptibility of farmers to new information going into underserved communities. So we always try and partner with a local leader when we go in. I'm going to stop there because I know Lacey will have some additional things to say. So
Great.
With that,
thank you, Jen.
Thanks.
Lacey? And Lacey has 2 roles, so you could tell us a little bit about both.
Sure. My name is Lacey Ingreo. I am a beginning farmer. I have been farming for about the last 8 years, but on our own leased land since 2014. And my educational background is actually in transpersonal psychology with a concentration in eco-psychology. And so really one of my main intentions for the farm is to ensure that I'm bringing that to my work. So whether it's in encouraging or including sensory gardens, practicing mindfulness when we're gardening. I also do some movement practices. So that's a really important piece. One of my main things that we do is beekeeping, along with growing a variety of other things. And I take I make value-added food products as well from those beekeeping supplies. But we essentially create artisanal honey. So we ensure that everything is raw and coming right from the local environment right here. And we allow people to kind of try a variety of them at one time, making it almost like a honey flight. And so we really encourage the education of honeybees and of honey as a whole. What we know about it is that it's depleting and our supply is much greater than our demand right now. So we do our best to encourage that education. I also, my other hat, I also have previously worked with Michigan Food and Farming Systems as their program manager. I had some work to do with the creation of the Women in Ag Development Center and the Women in Ag program management around the education that they essentially called for.
Thank you very much. So we're gonna switch now to talk a little bit about your perceptions of women and their farming goals. And so there's actually, I have 2 questions. So we'll do the first and then the second one. So when you think about the women farmers that you work with, what themes do you see in terms of what draws them to farming? And how do they define success? And I'd like to start with Jennifer.
So one of the major themes that I see with the women in our network that come to farming is they want to have control over the food that they have access to for their local families and for their communities. A lot of women come to farming with that in mind. They see a problem either with their personal families or in their neighborhoods, and they want to address it through food and sharing of resources. It's often viewed as a way to address inequities with structural racism. And it becomes a way for a lot of women to recover from trauma, whether that be financial trauma or some sort of emotional or physical trauma. Women that come to farming in our network constantly talk about those ways that farming and connection with the soil and with each other and other women helps them heal.
So, and then, okay, well, I think we'll do everybody with this question. So Lindsay, if you would be next.
Definitely. I agree even with what I heard from Jennifer. What I've seen a lot with women is that family. When I thought about this question and I rethought about it, the first word that came to mind was family. And a lot of the women that I've worked with kind of describing my audience are older women farmers. And I think that that's a demographic that is not really seen a lot. And I don't know if I've been watching Grace and Frankie lately, but it's just this more common theme of not seeing women in an older age and then not seeing women of color. So a lot of people don't realize that there are women of color farmers that are older and they're retired women and they're making a second career of going back to the farm. And so what that looks like physically with their bodies and staying healthy and staying agile and being able to do it. And then also what it looks like with becoming an entrepreneur again, if this is a second entrepreneurial excursion, or if it's the first time that they're going into owning a business for themselves. So I definitely see empowerment in the size of women, like reclaiming land, reclaiming space, and then reclaiming their ability to do things like that. And then again, when I think about younger women of color farmers that I've experienced, I also see family again in the ability to control the food that their children eat, concerns about what's in the food, concerns about allergies, even I've heard stories of women whose children were sick, and so they wanted that brought them down the path of farming, wanting to actually grow that food. And then the last thing that I thought about a lot is sovereignty of land, that ownership, wanting to be able to control land, own land, and like some women stepped up to the plate when it came to heir property, land in the family, being able to be the matriarch of their family, and the land being a basis of the power of their matriarchy. So those are some of the common themes that I have seen around women in farming.
Thank you. Shitomi, I know your connection with farmers might be a little bit indirect, so maybe thinking about women entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take a different slant. My area of expertise may not necessarily be in ag, but definitely in the realm of business. What I see when that later part of the question, when you asked about success, what does that mean? And from a perspective of my personal experience and others that I have worked with, I think defining success is really understanding the system and understanding what's involved in making one successful. So when you're going into business, there's a lot of different things that you want to understand, different things that you have to learn, different partnerships that you have to forge to make sure that you are successful in what it is that you're doing. So I would really hone in on the structural standpoint as well as the policy standpoint. Because not only do you have to understand the realm of a business and how does a business work, but you also have to understand the policy that's associated with business and owning the business. Because there is, from when you're understanding the policy, there are the rules of what one has to follow. And if you don't understand the rules, it's hard to move forward.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And finally on this one, Lacey, what drew you to farming? You touched on it in your introduction, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about how you define success on your farm.
Yeah, I also add there that I find a lot of the women that we work with, even through Women in Ag, one of their goals is education, is to take what they know and then to share it, which is such a sweet space to be in, when you believe that you have those necessary skills to share. And so for me, that definitely is one of them. Education, being able to provide education to my community is one of them. For me, being able to conduct myself in a way that is ethical and equitable for my community members, for my family, is really important. That defines success in a major way for us. We've been in business for 4 or 5 years, and we don't make money, right? I mean, we're not making a ton of money in this, and it really is a labor of love in so many ways. And so I think success, from what I find from the other women that I work with as well, is that it doesn't always come down to that economic value, and we want it to, right? We want it to build to that and come to that, but many times when we're getting into it, that's not necessarily what drives us there. And like many farmers and people that do this, I farm full time, but my partner has a off farm full time job. And success for us would look like him being able to do this with us, with me full time, and to do this together. And then ensure that my community around us knows the plight of our food system. So we do education at markets and ensuring that people know what's happening with bees, where their honey is coming from. Continuing to get that out is a big success for us.
So just continuing on, Jen, I'm wondering if you could just really briefly also talk about things that how you manage stress, re-energize, and keep your farm and your family resilient. Farming is a really stressful occupation. So we'll go from the personal to you to what the others have observed this time.
So one of the things that I have seen very strong in the Women in Ag network as far as improving resiliency and recovery from stress is women coming together in a safe space, and being able to share stories and challenges and laugh and cry together. We always try to do that over a potluck so that we actually are taking time to sit and slow down and enjoy some of the fruits of our labors on the farms. We also, meet up for beers at Farmer Beer Night a lot, and that has a lot to help us just coming together and knowing that you're not in it alone, and learning that. I think that's one of the great things about women farmers, like Lacey mentioned. There's such a strong desire to share opportunities and success within that community, that re-energizes you when you're down. So if you have a problem, chances are somebody else that is a woman that you farm with has had that problem and may have found a resource to be able to share. And that's one of the things that I think we've seen really be able to bring people out of a funk and keep us going.
And Lacey, your personal experience with that?
Yeah, I think Jen really nailed it. Is we come together to share our stories with one another. One of the ways that we came about was because women were calling out for a network of support, and that always is surrounded by food, and that sharing. So I think she just got it perfectly.
Shitomi, your perspective on how women re-energize?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, my background is in, or fortunately, is in business administration and then a doctorate in educational leadership. So a lot of my answers will be very business focused. I hear the warm and fuzzy, but then I also take a different slant from managing stress. So when I look at managing stress, I look at learning from it. And as Kelsey, the presenter prior to, really honed in, and her program really honed in on mentors and having someone that you can go to bounce ideas off of and or learn from those mistakes, if you will, I think is key. Managing your stress or being in a stressful situation doesn't necessarily, tongue-in-cheek, have to be stressful. You have to take it for what it is and then learn from it. So from my perspective and how I managed stress when I was in business and had a small business and tried to work through was, yes, partnering with your community, but also partnering with a trusted mentor that you can bounce things off of. But then also key is learning from it. And I think that's in any and everything that you do, right? You learn from your mistakes and then you try to get a little bit better.
Yeah. And Lindsay?
Yeah, not to echo too much of what I heard, but just to pull out some things, definitely like Shitomi said, I think mentorship is something I've observed women farmers do, lean on other women farmers that have been more successful and try to get tools and tricks from them of the trade. Networks was a big thing that I had written down. As I go through the different networks that I know of in the state, a lot of them run in concentric circles. Women from this organization know these type of women. So that really brings people together. And then honestly, like not to toot our own horns too much, but definitely our cooperative extension program has been an outlet for women and has helped women. Historically, it's proven has helped to create a space to really reach minority farmers, women farmers, and help them to get access to things like USDA loans that they might have trouble accessing, might have trouble or need confidence in processing. So I definitely think resources, learning how to tap into resources, networks, mentorships that can show you resources, and then having good community partners in the area that can help you. I think a lot of that releases the pressure and alleviates the stress for women that I've come across.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. So we're going to move on now to looking at common challenges that people have, that women farmers of color and other underserved audiences encounter when they're establishing or growing their farms and ranches. So I'm wondering if there are a common set of challenges you've observed with women farmers of color encountering and establishing or growing their farms and ranches. And let's start with Jen.
One of the issues that I see most commonly in different communities of color in Michigan is that connections and information or access to the knowledge of the traditional agricultural community has been kept from many women of color. They've just never been exposed to it. So, there's a lot of predominantly white farm commodity groups that give out information, and they're just not reaching out to a lot of these communities. So just having knowledge that programs and support exist through some of the safety net programs is one of the major things that I see. And another common challenge that I see is this juxtaposition between running a profitable farm business and also making sure that your community is provided for, especially if you live in a more limited resource community. You have neighbors that are struggling with hunger, loss of jobs. Trying to take care of that community while running a business is one of the challenges that I see across the board.
Lacey, is there anything that you would add to Jen's?
No, I think the only thing I would add is just the fact that women of color are oftentimes just not heard when they're vocalizing, and we see it in a lot of different places where they're spoken over, or ideas are not taken into consideration, and I think that happens across the board, and definitely in a industry such as farming.
And Lindsay?
Yeah, so this one, I would think a lot of times as well, challenges that they might not, of course, some of the things like not being heard, not being felt, not being seen, those are like direct challenges that women face, but then there's often and always those indirect challenges. So like the policy side of things, which is why it's structural racism. So not getting your grant funded, just the whole grant process. We know that there's inherent structures in that. And even as being a panelist reviewing grants, that there's inherent struggles in that. And so with policy, a lot of times, like especially with the land grant system, our clients in the Black Belt, there's a disparity of funding within the land grant system, the way 1890s are funded compared to 1862s. And so of course that's going to trickle down to the people, because the programs that they have to serve them are not funded in the same level and at the same basis of equity as programs that serve other communities and other women. So that's always going to be a problem, the actual structural side of it, where the resources are. The pot if the pot is only so big and we're not filling it to the right levels, of course anyone trying to get something out of there is going to be at a disadvantage. And then observations, as well, just in also structural. So you look at like the 2501 program in the Farm Bill for socially disadvantaged farmers, that has changed over the years to include women. And so now you kind of get a competition of woes where it's like, well, women have it hardest. No, women of color have it hardest. No, veterans have it hardest. No. And so you have all these different levels. And then always women, this goes back, you can even look at the research during the Civil Rights Movement, women of color have to relay being a woman in the woman's movement and then being a woman of color. And what does that mean, right? So it's like, what banner does she have to wear higher? And it's also that you're often made to choose between, are you a woman or are you a woman of color? And what does that identity mean? And sometimes you're in competition even with other women of resources, and it's like, oh, we're all equal because we're all women, we all face the same challenges, but data, science, and your own intuition should tell you that is not true. So those are some of the things that I have seen so far.
And Shitomi, would you like to chime in on this? And
absolutely. I would love to echo my colleagues, especially what Jennifer and Lindsay stated as it relates to resources. So a small example is really understanding the policy. So for example, with me personally, I applied for certification as a minority-owned business and as a woman-owned business. And while I applied for it and I knew that was something I needed to do, I still did not know what to do and how to take that to the next level. So really understanding the structure and the certifications and the different things that benefit us, but even outside of that, how do you grow upon that? And then looking at your mentorship as a two-way street. I think oftentimes when you find a mentor, you think that the mentor should know everything, but understanding that the mentor is also learning from you and you are also learning from the mentor. And there's several different mentors that you can have. Don't only segment yourself to one or two people. because everyone has an area of expertise from different areas and subject matters. So when I look at challenges, that's what I look at, is that even if we do know the policy, how do we know how to navigate that policy effectively?
So just to continue on, Shitomi, with you for the next question, do you have any